Hello, my name is Melanie Stachelski, and I am a licensed professional counselor. And today I'm going to talk about how patients and caregivers manage their mental health through the different stages of their journey with AML. I absolutely love the work that I get to do as a cancer counselor, and it's very personal to me because I am also a survivor of AML. I was diagnosed with AML in 2009, and I went through all of my treatment, including a stem cell transplant in Colorado in 2010. And I know everyone here listening would agree that the physical toll of cancer is enormous, but most cancer survivors, including myself, would also say that the mental and emotional part of cancer is equally as difficult. I'm going to start today by talking about some of the common emotions and anxieties that people experience after being diagnosed with AML. And I'll talk about why survivorship is often so much harder than people expect it to be. And there are also tons of valuable resources out there. So I'm going to talk about a lot of those today as how you can support yourself on your cancer journey. When clients first come to me, they're usually feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and scared. And I think they almost feel embarrassed that they're not handling their diagnosis better. They'll tell me, I don't know what's wrong with me. If I was just mentally stronger, I could hold it together better. So one of the most important things that I do for my clients is to normalize some of the really confusing emotions that they are experiencing. I always start by telling them, if you are struggling, I promise you're not the only one. And if your anxiety feels out of control, you're not crazy. There is nothing wrong with you. Unfortunately, this roller coaster of emotions is just a very normal part of having cancer, but it's a part that we don't talk about very much. To help my clients make more sense of what they're going through, I tell them to think about their cancer diagnosis as having some distinct phases. So the first phase starts with the shock and surprise of their diagnosis. And this first phase includes all their treatment, so chemo, radiation, and transplant. During this first phase, people feel anxious, fearful, and worried. And the main goal here is just coping the best they can and getting through treatment. People tend to feel like they get tunnel vision, where they just put their head down, focus on their treatment plan and the appointments that are right in front of them. And they don't really pick their head up to take in the bigger picture of what's happening because it's just too much and too scary. The second phase of a cancer diagnosis happens after the treatment is complete or when they move into a maintenance phase. And most people think here that their mental health will feel better, like they should be feeling really good at this point. But I often see people really struggling here because this is actually a really hard time emotionally. This is the time when the dust starts to settle and the patient can finally look around and think, what did I just go through? And it can feel really confusing. During this second phase, I hear a lot of my clients say things like, I should be happy that I'm finishing treatment, but instead I feel scared. I once heard someone say that the two worst days for a cancer patient were, number one, the day they heard you have cancer, and number two was the day they heard you're done with treatment and you don't need to come back anymore. So at first glance, this sounds crazy, right? Why would finishing treatment feel emotionally difficult? Well, for someone who's used to being constantly monitored and rarely alone, this new freedom can make someone feel really vulnerable. They might find themselves wondering, but who will notice if the cancer comes back? And can I really trust that I'm okay? You're telling me I'm okay, but can I really believe it? After months of treatment, the nurses, doctors, and staff at their cancer center probably feel like family. So of course, they're glad to start spacing out their appointments, but it can also feel really lonely. And most people report that the friends who used to text and call all the time to check in on them, they start to get back to their normal lives. And it can even feel like their family members move on. This is a phenomenon that we call the treatment cliff, because people expect to feel happy that they're finishing treatment, but it can end up feeling like all of their support is suddenly pulled out from under them and they're falling off of a cliff. So this is an experience that is really normal, but it catches people off guard. Something else that I hear my clients say during this middle phase is, I don't feel like celebrating yet. My clients will say, I finished chemo or I hit my 100 days post-transplant and my family wants to throw me a big party. I can't explain it, but I just really don't feel like celebrating. In our society, we have a lot of expectations for what it looks like to be a cancer survivor. There seems to be an assumption that if you have cancer, you should run a race, start a charity, or start checking those big things off of your bucket list. Cancer survivors should be living to the fullest every day. But I talk to a lot of people who are more reluctant to celebrate. Sometimes getting through cancer doesn't feel like a victory, and you don't feel like a hero. It just feels like something you had to endure because you had no other choice. And sometimes the idea of a celebration comes more from the people around the patient, who assume that the end of treatment means that they get to close the door on the chapter of their life called cancer, never think about it again, and things can finally get back to normal or how things were before their cancer diagnosis. I caution my clients that this transition from being sick back to being healthy can be really difficult. There's a tension that exists here because they're going back to the life that they once knew, but they might not feel like the same person that they were before. Again, all of this can feel really confusing. On the one hand, of course, they're grateful to be getting through treatment, to be alive, and hopefully to be doing well. But at the same time, most people also feel sad, angry, or just kind of numb and in shock. The main goal as a therapist during this second phase is emotional processing. And the major emotions that I see during this phase is grief and loss. People experience a lot of grief for what they had to go through and what their bodies had to go through. And they feel the loss of what cancer has taken from them, because cancer takes so much from all of us. So this is obviously not a pleasant time, but it's one of the most important phases that I normalize for people, because it can be so confusing when they are feeling that grief and loss, but everyone around them wants them to be happy and moving on. So what can we do to help cancer survivors and caregivers get through these hard phases? The work in that middle phase is focused on processing what they've been through and healing from the trauma. Over the years, I've really come to think of cancer as not just one trauma, but a series of traumatic events. So there are a few core components of how people can manage their mental health and heal from the trauma. And I feel like every person with cancer can benefit from these. So I would encourage all of you to think of ways that you can incorporate some of these into your life. The first component of healing from trauma is letting go of the past, so that the memories of your cancer don't hold so much intensity and emotion anymore. A person will always feel sad that they had to go through this, but over time, cancer should feel like a chapter of your story that is clearly in the past. Most of the time, this will happen really naturally, but sometimes there will be parts of someone's cancer experience that feels really intense when they think about it. Most cancer survivors and caregivers will say there are certain places, sounds, smells, or even a commercial on TV that can bring back a flood of emotions and memories. I talked to one woman who told me she would race to turn off her microwave before the timer and the alarm would go off, because the sound of the alarm on her microwave reminded her of the beeping on her IV chemo pole, and she just couldn't hear that sound. And another man told me he was months out of treatment and he wanted to go back to his cancer clinic to volunteer. And so he went to the cancer clinic and took the elevator up to the infusion room, stepped out of the elevator, and had a panic attack. So what's going on here? Well, there's more and more research showing that cancer survivors and caregivers can have post-traumatic stress, or PTSD. Most people associate PTSD with people who have seen combat in the military or experienced some other horrific event. We don't often give credit to how shocking, scary, and life-changing a cancer diagnosis can be. So if someone you know could use some additional support, they may want to talk to a therapist, a psychologist, or a social worker, ideally someone who is familiar with oncology. Most cancer clinics and hospitals have psychologists or social workers on staff that are available for you to talk to. They might also have a list of therapists in the community that they know and trust and can refer you to. The next component of healing from trauma is connection with others. Sometimes the best support you can get is from other people who have also been through this, people who can tell you what their actual experience was. A lot of people love the dynamic of a support group for connection. This may be one of the only places in a cancer survivor's life where they will be in a group of people who can truly say, I know what you're going through. There are support groups that are disease specific, so specifically for AML or other blood cancers. There are cancer support groups for caregivers or for young adults. There are in-person groups or also online groups for people who prefer to interact virtually. There's something called one-on-one peer support that can match you with another person who is around your same age, a similar diagnosis, and a similar treatment plan. So you can talk one-on-one to some people who have a similar experience as you. And lastly, there are so many wonderful community organizations and nonprofits that get cancer survivors together for social outings. It could be outdoor adventure, fitness, art, or other interests. And the young adult community also has several great organizations for people who are around age 18 to 40. The third component of healing is to reconnect with your body. During cancer, it can feel like your body has betrayed you. So how can you begin to experience your body in a different way now, in a more positive and friendly way? This can be any modality that helps someone pay attention to what's going on in their body. So yoga, Tai Chi, Reiki, massage, or if you're a really active person, it can be working out or going for a run or a walk, but really paying attention to how strong you feel when you're being active. So any practice that you enjoy that makes you feel safe and healthy in your body. The fourth component is mindfulness. This is one of the most important things that I teach people. Mindfulness is simply ways of learning how to calm our bodies and calm our minds and to live more in the present moment. You have probably heard of a term called scan anxiety or test anxiety. This is what we talk about when people end up feeling really anxious before they have a big scan coming up or a blood test or a bone marrow biopsy. So what I tell my clients about scan anxiety and cancer in general is that most of these hard emotions are triggered when they're worrying about the future or when the future feels really uncertain. So what's that bone marrow biopsy going to say? What is my doctor going to say at the next appointment? But when we can bring our minds back to the present moment, to what's happening right here in front of us, most of the time things are actually okay. So a lot of hospitals and cancer clinics are teaching mindfulness classes now. There's also great apps you can put on your phone. They are free and they're a great way to get started with mindfulness if you are just learning. And the last component of healing and mental health today that I want to talk about is self-compassion. Cancer survivors and caregivers are pretty notorious for putting on a really brave face and making sure everyone around them is okay. But I see every day how devastating a cancer diagnosis can be. And I see how hard cancer survivors and caregivers are on themselves when they don't feel positive and upbeat all the time. So if there are any survivors and caregivers watching this today, I just want to tell you to remember to be kind to yourself. You've been through so much and healing is absolutely possible, but it takes time. Self-compassion, patience, and kindness to yourself are all essential parts of this healing. Thanks so much for listening today.